Welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jain Irrigation Training Series. And today we're going to be talking about forecasted ET for better water management. And when I think about this subject, a lot of times I think about what I call old school water management, which is really pretty modern and new school just a few years ago. And that was measuring ET to see how much water you needed to put down today to be a successful water manager. Well, things have changed dramatically over the last couple of years, and now certain softwares, including Jain Logic and Jain Unity, are looking at forecasted weather and looking forward as well as backwards to figure out or to calculate how much water needs to be applied to a crop or a landscape. So today we're going to learn a little bit about this, and taking us on this journey is Cunningham. And Connor, if you've seen Connor work before or give these presentations, he's really good at explaining the complicated subjects that we go through sometimes and putting it in a way that we can all really enjoy it and understand it. Connor's a Fresno State grad. He's been working in ag tech for about 5 years now. And certainly anytime I run into a customer of Connor, I hear great things about him. And mostly I hear about how much Connor cares about their success. So Connor, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you doing another training session with us.
Right. Well, thanks for letting me participate. I really do enjoy getting to be involved with these. And, I really enjoy getting to think about various topics to talk about, especially ones that are reflective of a lot of the things that I deal with and receive questions from growers about. So I get really excited about this topic here, utilizing ET data and how we can use that for recommendations and building irrigation schedules. So you can ask anybody on our team. I get a little bit nerdy when it comes to satellite data. I get really excited about it. So,
well, you're at the right place to be nerdy then today. So here's the thing I wonder though, you guys just launched your water management services earlier this year. It's going to be close to 100 degrees in Fresno. I mean, this is, you guys have been busy. I'd love to hear, and I know everybody wants to know, how's it going? This is really kind of out of the box this year thinking. But, Jain really prides itself on innovation and technology. So it makes perfect sense that you guys are doing it. How's it going?
Yeah. And, just like we were talking about here before we started, the water availability is a real concern this year, and making sure that we're capitalizing and getting more crop per drop, as our logo states, and so it's been really well received. Jeff Tool's been doing a great job, and I know that we're going to have more in-depth updates coming. But just from my perspective, we've had a really great response so far. People are really enjoying working with the water management services, and some of our growers are even having their PCAs involved, and the PCAs have been giving us the thumbs up, saying, man, you guys are spot on, you're doing a great job. So that's been a major pat on the back for us, and we've really enjoyed that kind of a feedback.
That is so great to hear, because when you think about that synergy between you and the PCAs, the growers are really going to benefit from this. And you guys are going to see things when you put your heads together that just looking from one perspective or another, you might not see. That is really exciting. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. It's, again, it's a huge boost to confidence, and it lets us know that, we made the right choice by, making this investment, taking that jump, and trying to provide something that's beneficial for growers.
Yeah. So Connor, I'm looking at this first slide that you have up here, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking at. It's pretty. I like all the colors.
Yeah.
The middle one kind of looks like a big swimming lap pool, right? What are we looking at here?
Yeah. So this is actually some imagery from one of our water management users, and I thought it was a great example, so I wanted to include it. And I'm glad we're going to get a chance to talk about it here. So, this first image on the left-hand side is just the Google image showing, what the block looks like, from an aerial view. And we can see that the little icon in there shows us that this grower is also benefiting from having one of our soil moisture probes in the field. And then so from that same field, we're getting this middle image right here, which is the ET data, the observed ET. And it's telling us how much water is being consumed by the plant. And, I get asked a lot, well, what does blue mean? Is blue good? Yes, it is good, but it's got shades and it's got hues. So the darker blue, the more water is being consumed. So we can see in this image right here that we have, really dark blue spots, and we have a couple of lighter blue spots, right? Some of it's geometric, some of it's organic. And then this next image right here, if anybody's done any sort of searching into satellite imagery in this industry, this looks very cliche, right? The red, green, and the yellow and the orange. So this image on the right is the vigor image. So you can see it's the exact same shape. It's, another data set coming off of this exact same block. And it's telling us, vigor values for the block. And so we can see, dark green equals more vigorous. And then as we start to get into, yellows and reds, that tells us that there's less vigor. And I really like this example because it showcases, how beneficial something as simple as satellite data can be. We can see right here that, beyond the naked eye, we can see that there's some issues in this block that need to be addressed and scouted out. We can see this orangey area that is showing a drop in vigor.
So bear with me a second, Connor.
Sure.
So the blue in the middle, does
Mm-hmm.
that eventually turn into the green and yellow and red we see on the right? Am I right? Or is it a separate image, a separate way to look at it?
That is a great question, and I've never thought of it like that. But no, there are two separate images, two separate data sets. One is telling us water consumed, and then the green one is telling us green reflectance and leaf surface area.
When would I use the one in the middle, and when would I use the one on the right?
Right. Yes. So you're going to use the one in the middle for exactly what we're talking about today when we're thinking about how much water to apply, and knowing how much water has been consumed by our crop, and how hard, I'm doing air quotes if you're listening on the podcast afterwards. We're looking at, how hard the plants are working out in the field with this image in the middle here. And then the image on the right-hand side here, we're going to use this when we want to start to diagnose, how well are we applying our irrigation? How well are our plants responding from, maybe like a health standpoint? So in this instance here, this is a great example because the top portion, the northern portion of this block here is incredibly vigorous. It's doing really well. In fact, better than the majority of the field because of how dark green it is. But as we can see right here in the middle, there's some sort of an organic shape that's showing that there's a drop in vigor. So could be clogging, could be that there's a pest outbreak. So that helps us to identify, maybe even before we can see something with our eyes, issues that we can try to address out in the field.
That's fascinating. The other thing I wonder, Connor, is, do I have to take a semester course at the local community college to figure out how to read these, or, how do I learn this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can work with one of us here at Jain. If you're a water management user, you're already getting coached on how to read this data. But if you want to become a Jain Logic user, or if you're an existing Jain Logic user, you just reach out to your account manager, and we'd be more than happy to run through the data with you and try to figure out how to work on this. And I'm not some sort of whiz, but I did a lot of research by myself too. So there's a lot of great information out there published by credible sources, helping you to understand how to look at this data and how to work with it.
Yeah, and then one more question on this. So let's say that's my field on the right, and I detect a problem. I don't know what the problem is, right? I detect it from looking at this. Then I go out there and I fix it. I determine what the problem was, or I'm pretty sure it was this problem. So then I fix it. When am I going to get my next satellite image to show me that, yep, you did fix it?
Yeah. So the nice thing about satellites is they're in orbit. And so, every week you're getting an updated image. So every week you can check back in and see how things are doing. So even just the satellite service is a great a great way to kind of gauge yourself. How am I doing? Maybe I had some issues out in the field. Maybe I had some maintenance issues that I wanted to address and start to work to remedy. You can use something as like satellite data, which is, free in some instances to be able to access, and start using that to as your report card. Hey, how am I doing? Are my remedies working?
Yeah, and which is so great, right? And I grew up learning cotton farming in Arizona, and we planted in March or April, and we figured out how we were doing in October and November.
Right,
We had
right.
other indicators during the year that gave us an idea, but you really didn't find out what your report card was until it was too late to
Hmm.
do anything. So I love being able to make a change, see the change, and what the effect was on my crop, and then go forward. I also want to remind everybody that I do have the Q&A and the chat open. If you have some questions for Connor, put them in there, and I'll be happy to relay those to Connor as he's going along here.
Great, great. So getting to the topic at hand here today. Perfect. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between, observed ETC versus forecasted ETC, and how we can use those in, determining what our water management strategy might be. And then we'll run through some calculations of utilizing both of these methods and combining both of these methods. And then also throughout the course of our discussion today, we'll also talk about the importance of having the most up-to-date information on your irrigation system as possible, because as we'll see here in a little bit, it's important to know certain aspects about your irrigation system's performance, because it will drastically affect how much water you determine to apply to your field. So jumping in here, observed ETC versus forecasted ETC, very simply put, observed ETC is, looking at what's already happened, and forecasted ETC is just that. It's like watching the news and seeing, okay, what is the forecast supposed to be? What do we think we are going to consume in the coming week, right? So we have people who like to just focus on what we call the replenishment method, where you're just replenishing what's already been consumed. And we have other people who strictly focus on what's going to be happening. And then I'm in this camp. I like to kind of ride the middle, right? I want to make sure that I at least replenish what my crop has already consumed, so I'm not stressing it unnecessarily. And then I like to be aware of what's going to happen in the coming weeks. These past weeks have been a great example, right? We've seen, high rises in temperatures, and then all of a sudden just a drop in the temperature for the next week, and then a rise. So we've seen these sawtooth patterns. And, with the water management services, it's been a real unique experience to work around that and be agile with the changing forecasts. So,
It's interesting, Connor, in landscape irrigation, right? Mostly if we're looking backwards, right? We know it's been hot. It's hot yesterday, it's
right.
hot today. So pour on the water because it's going to be hot tomorrow. In landscape irrigation, you save the most amount of water when things start to cool down. And so a conventional controller will just keep pouring the water on, and that's terrible. A somewhat smart controller will look at it's been hot and keep putting it on based on that. And
Right.
something that does forecasted ET will start to slow it down because they can see the cooling. And so at a time where you have the biggest opportunity to save, that's when you save the most. It's really amazing to see the extra savings that our customers have been getting.
Right. Exactly. So, it's good to be aware of what's going on, and be aware of all the different aspects that are affecting, how we're going to determine how much water to apply, right? And, I have that here as the last data point, considering what other factors we want to be aware of, so there might be some labor that we have scheduled for the coming week that we need to work around, so we need to be cognizant of that. Or we might have some other data points that we want to take into consideration when we're determining our irrigation schedule. So as you can see here, I have 3 boxes on the screen, and the very bottom box here at the bottom of the screen is one that I use very frequently when I'm creating irrigation recommendations for our water management users. And it's year-to-date applied water versus year-to-date water consumed. So it's an incredibly helpful metric to work from, to say, how are we doing, right? Because we know that there's a specific curve that crops take as they progress through their phenological stages. And as they progress through those stages, as they grow, their their demand for water grows with it, right? To a certain point. So I put this one here because I'm obviously very proud of it, because this grower and I have done a really good job of maintaining a very close relationship of water applied versus water consumed. So if we look at, maybe for example here, maybe there was a 2 inch, excuse me, a 2 acre-inch difference between water consumed versus water applied. I would take that into consideration and say, okay, for this coming week, we want to put on 1.1 acre inches of water, but we're going to go ahead and add on an additional ½ inch because A, we know it's going to be hot, and B, we want to try to catch up and close that gap between the year-to-date applied versus consumed as well.
Connor, we have a question from one of our viewers, and they want to know, in general, broad question, and in general, how many of your growers actually know what their DU is on their property?
That is a very good question. It's kind of split down the middle. And I would say of that split, some people think they know what their DU is, but have kind of a good guess, and some other people don't. But it's an incredibly important factor to take into consideration. And we recommend, and we do practice this, that you consider your DU when you're creating your irrigation schedule and you're running through your calculations. So we encourage it, and we'd like to see more of it, because I'll go ahead and switch to the next slide here, and you'll see why it's so important to know what your DU is and to apply that. So, again, talking to those people who think they know what their DU is, it would be worth thinking about having a DU test done to the block in question, because you want to make sure that as close within reasonable doubt what that DU is, because it can really add up over a season if you're not taking into consideration that DU. So in this next slide here, we have, two different ways of running calculations. We have the replenishment method based off of the observed ETC, and then we have the forecast method based off of the forecast ETC. And so at the top here, we can see that we take our water consumed from the last week, and then we divide that by our application rate times our DU, and that gives us about 33.6 hours. Well, this next line down, we see that taking the DU out of there, it drops our run time by 4 or 5 hours approximately. 4 or 5 hours every week, let's just go ahead and generalize it. 4 or 5 hours every week over the course of a season is a lot of water not being applied. And so we're shorting ourselves, and we're potentially hurting our yields at the end of the season, because we might be unnecessarily stressing our plants when we don't need to be.
Yeah, no kidding. So we have another question here from one of the viewers, and that is, how do you measure the consumed water? How do we know how much water we consumed last week?
Right. So there is a number of various resources available. There's a number of public resources available. The UCANR, the research extensions, have a weekly email that's available to you to let you know how much water is consumed per crop per region, but they're very generalized, right? So it's going to say, okay, we have a station here in Parlier, for example, where we're measuring ETC for various crops that we have at the research station. Well, if you're over in Fowler, right, or in Cunningham, right, and you're not that close to the research center, you're like, okay, I'm going to use that number, but is it as close to my crop and my location as possible? Probably not. And so that's where it can start to get a little hairy. So those are good resources that are available. They're free. They're public resources. So that's where you can find some of that information. And then, the CIMIS service also has some information as well.
So Connor, you were really polite. You mentioned in a very nice way that there are some growers that don't know what their DU is on, or distribution uniformity is on their fields. Do you guys go out and measure that somehow? What do you do there?
Yeah, so as part of our water management service, if a grower hasn't had their DU done on their field in, recent years, like 1 to 2 years. As part of this service, we go out and we perform a modified DU test based off of the ITRC Cal Poly guidelines, right? And so we go out and we'll collect flow measurements and pressure measurements in a randomized pattern throughout a specific block, and we'll collect that information and provide that information to them. We found it's actually been very powerful too, because not only do they now have a measured value that they can work from, but we're also identifying issues as we're going throughout the field, right? And it's really helpful for them to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was dealing with some of these issues, and it's marked and low, so they can go out to these spots specifically that we visited and go start to work on some of these issues. So
That's really great. Oftentimes, the visual inspection we find is sometimes the fastest way to get the most amount and least expensive way of getting the best savings.
Right.
Sometimes you don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you aren't measuring it, then, you're gambling a little bit, right?
Right. So, and then a lot of this information is just available from public sources.
Right. But you're going to be doing a lot of calculations like this by hand, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that. People have been doing it for decades, right? So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's a non-zero sum time consumed every week. And if you're managing hundreds or maybe even thousands of acres, that time adds up, right? So of course we learn as we go and we start to learn some generalities, but as we know, this year is different than last year, and last year was different than the year before that. So there's minute changes that could really make a big difference, that if we're not paying attention to them regularly, could really have an impact on our bottom line at the end of the year.
It's very interesting, Connor, as I think about that, because I think, there's a lot of old timers like myself that might think, hey, water management's an art. It's not a science, but we actually know that what the holding capacity of soil is and what the depletion rate is and when you have to put more water on. And it's really just a series of calculations that I may or may not take the time to do and just apply water when I think it's right. But if I take the time to do the calculations and know the calculations in the first place, it will take a lot of time. Your software takes care of this for me?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And I'd really like to, jump into a demo here, because, yes, you can do this by hand. You can do it with a pen and a pad. You could do it on a spreadsheet, but, what we use and what I, think works better, or not better, but best, let me rephrase there. What I think works better is, using a system like Jain Logic, where it's doing a lot of these rote calculations for you. And then you, the user, get to make that final decision on, am I going to work with this recommendation, and am I going to follow it to the T, or am I going to make some adjustments based on my local knowledge of what's going on here and now?
Yeah, that's great. I really do. I'd love to see a live demo here. I know everybody else would like to see that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I just hitting on one more point that you talked about here, it's kind of like an art form. I still think that there is a little bit of an art form to it, right? Because we can see right here on the slide, the forecasted hour is asking for 50 hours and the replenishment is asking for 33.6. So in the example here, let's go ahead and start to practice and mock up what we just talked about, kind of shooting the middle. So just, for argument's sake and for demo's sake, let's go ahead and schedule some 40-hour run times on a couple of blocks here in Jain Logic. So let me scroll over here and open up Jain Logic. Is everybody able to see it?
We can, you bet.
Perfect, great. So I'm actually going to go ahead and use a real world example of an irrigation scheme that I've been providing to one of our water management users, where he has two blocks that are neighboring each other, and one is a lighter soil and one is a heavier soil. So it's really fun because one, we get to do more of a pulse irrigation scheme, and then the other one we apply heavier sets because the soil can hold it. So let's go ahead and mock that up. So we're going to go ahead and click on this block right here, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up my irrigation schedule and start to schedule some irrigation for the coming week. So I can see that I haven't put on any water yet. So today I'll go ahead and say that I want to run 20 hours on Wednesday.
So let me just stop you 1 second here, Connor.
Sure.
Where did the 20 hours come from? Was this just an arbitrary number you pulled out, or?
Yeah, so I said 20 hours because in that slide, working off of our example, we saw that to replenish, we needed a minimum of 33.6 or 34 hours.
Right.
And then we saw that for the coming week, we're forecasted 50 hours. So I went ahead and shot a little bit on the lower side, but kind of added a little bit more. And I decided to just go with 40 hours. Sometimes people have constraints on water availability or ordering water or, peak run times. So sometimes it's nice to have nice round numbers to work with, but
Okay, great.
Just for argument's sake.
Yeah, just want to be sure we knew where you got
Right.
that.
Yeah. And then I'll go ahead and add another 20 hours on Saturday here. And I'll just add that for, let's find 12 p.m. again, just arbitrarily. And then I'll go ahead and hit save. So we can see here that I now have 40 hours in 2 large sets scheduled for this block, because in our example, this has a heavier soil. So go ahead and close that one. So now that we have our heavier soil scheduled, I'll come up to our quote unquote lighter soil block right here, neighboring it. And then we'll do more of a pulse irrigation scheme here. So I can see that I've already applied a little bit of water, so I'm going to take that into consideration. So I'm going to open up and I'm going to start to say, okay, since I had some water put on Monday, I'll skip a day, let my soil dry down a little bit, and then I'll apply another. So that way I'm not pushing water out the bottom. And I'll go ahead and I'll put 12 hours on Wednesday. And then again, I want to let it dry down. I'm going to apply a little bit, and then I'm going to let it dry down a little bit, and then I'll apply a little bit more, making sure that I don't put down too much. And I'm going to add a little bit more because I want to try to reach that 40-hour mark. So I'll put some on Friday, and then I'll put on a little bit more here on Sunday. There we go.
So you watered on Monday, you're adding some on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there we go. So we can see now I have a pulse scheme where I'm putting on some water, I'm letting it sit, and then I'm putting on a little bit more water. I'm letting it sit, putting on a little bit more water, because I have a lighter soil. So if I put on too much water all at once, I'm going to be pushing it out the bottom, right? So now I have my irrigation saved. Oh, I forgot to hit save, but but we can see that that's the exercise here. And then coming through here, I can also check, I just wanted to highlight this. You can see in the system that the forecast is showing us what the the forecasted ET is for the coming week. But because this user's been using it for more than a year, we can actually see the historical versus what's being projected this year. And we can see that, yeah, they're similar, but they're almost an inch different, right? There's almost an acre inches worth of difference. So yes, we can start to learn and understand, okay, at this time of year, I need to put on X number of inches per week for this crop. But again, these minute differences can add up over time and start to make a difference.
What a great point. As we were talking earlier before we started, I said it's my feeling that it's warmer earlier in Fresno than it has been. That's just my feeling. I didn't think it was an inch warmer, right? So this actually puts some definition to the feeling and gives you some parameters of how much more water to add. That's great.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, Connor, are you using some kind of monster internet system? I mean, this is so fast as we go screen to screen. How is that happening?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky because usually AT&T shorts me out here, but no, I'm just using Google Chrome, and I'm just running the Jain Logic system. It's so fast because we wanted to make sure that we had a system that was reliable and robust. So, we at Jain, invested a lot of money into our back-end infrastructure to ensure that we have, the fastest load times and the most robust system. Obviously, problems still do occur. Let's live in reality here. But, we've put in a lot of work to ensure that our growers receive the best experience possible.
Yeah, that's great, because oftentimes when you're looking at this, you might be stressed a little bit. It's early in your day, you got about 10 other things to do in the next hour. And man, slow speeds really frustrate. So it's great
Yeah.
to see it working so fast.
Yeah, exactly. And it's incredibly beneficial for us too when we're looking at trying to work with growers when we receive questions about, hey, what's going on out in the field? It's an incredible tool for us internally as well. We really enjoy getting to benefit from the amount of data, the type of data, and the fast speeds as well.
So a couple of questions have come in, Connor. The first one is, what is the source of the forecasted ET data?
Yeah, great question. So, in the system, we have two sources of ET data coming in, right? We have the observed ET coming in from the satellite, and then the forecasted is from a third-party forecast, and it's based off of your local zip code, right? So, like the example we talked about earlier, depending on where you're located, you might be running the risk of being a little bit too far away from the nearest weather station. So that's why we see that disparity between the forecasted amount versus, what was actually consumed. They're pretty close, but, it does take into consideration, where, you're going to be located in regards to some of these public weather stations. So we have access to a couple of different services there.
Yeah, that's awesome, Connor. Thank you. And we have another question that came in that I'd like to answer because it's asking about how this would work in the landscape industry, considering watering restrictions. And we use Jain Unity in the landscape situations, and they do have municipal water restrictions built into it. So you tell the software what the restrictions are, right? It asks, you have municipal water restrictions. You plug those in, and then the software takes that into account as it's making its calculations of when it should water and for how long.
Yeah, it's a very powerful system. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, that's how we're doing it. That's a system and a program and a method that we're using for providing water recommendations to our users and any Jain Logic users that might be watching right now. This is something that you have access to right away and you can start working with instantaneously. So
We've got another question that came in, Connor, and a viewer's asking, is the user required to determine the KC value?
Good question. So the system actually has preloaded KC values in it. So along with the ET coming in based off of your local zip code here, I'll go ahead and scroll up on the screen. The forecast is also taken into consideration your crop spacing, your row spacing, your emitter type, your emitter application rate, and the amount of acreage within that parcel or block in question. And then there are some crop models that are in the system, and it takes all that information into consideration and it creates this forecast right here. So, if this were table grapes, for example, it would be a lot higher, or if it were, cotton, it would be different, or if it so on and so forth. So it does change based off of the crop type because there is some preloaded information in there that the system is smart enough to calculate and work through.
So if I know my crop type, which I would know, right, if I was growing it,
I hope so.
Is it more, do I just put in almonds or does it get more specific than that?
Yeah, so some of the crops that we have in the system, you can add different varietals. So a lot of the almond guys that I work with, I'll be able to add in the multiple varietals because it's very common to have two varietals in a block. And so, for example, we could say, hey, this is an almond block right here, and we have nonpareil and Monterey's, for example, in the block, and it takes that into consideration.
Wow, that's great. So then just assigns it the KC that's appropriate for that varietal, and away you go.
Yeah, it'll assign it for the crop. Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So real powerful system, and it's a real beneficial tool. We got a lot of people that are really benefiting from it, and some people who are starting to discover, some Jain users that that have been using the system for a long time, just focus more on the soil moisture data, but are now learning about some of these additional tools that they've had available to them, are really enjoying and benefiting from it. So, it can be a little intimidating, starting to think about adding technology and data sets to the farm, right? Because we're all busy. Growers are especially busy. They have multiple items and objects to juggle at the same time. But using satellite data is a great way to get started, because much like with a lot of the other features and tools that I work with on a day-to-day basis, it's just enhancing or a more efficient method or way of doing a lot of the same practices that growers have been doing for decades, right? We're looking at how much water's in the soil. We're looking at how much water's being consumed. And so, this is a great way to kind of dip your toe in, right? So we're offering what we're calling Jain Logic sensorless. So you'd have access to the Jain Logic system and its forecasting abilities, as well as, having the satellite data being brought in for your field specifically. So if, you're interested in learning a little bit more, or even starting to participate, we're running a promotional offer of $500 per field, under the Jain Logic sensor list. So whether that's 20 acres or if it's 220 acres, it's $500 flat fee.
Connor, I was in Ramona, which is just outside of San Diego, on Saturday, and there's 100 different, I was shocked by this number, 100 different wine growers, wine grape growers out there now. It's really expanding. And I was talking about this and showing this, and they said, just for the confirmation that we're doing this right, just that insurance policy, this was so economical to them. It was a real no-brainer for a lot of them to go forward with this. For peace of mind, it's just, if that's the least you get out of it, and you're going to get a lot more, but just for the peace of mind, this is a great offer.
Right. And, let's say that you needed to have some remediations done. You're trying to bring up the efficiency of your field. This is a great way to start. You get to start to track your progress. The satellites are incredibly, accurate, and they're very sensitive. I get this question a lot as well. How accurate is the satellite data? So, let's step back for a second, right? So if you're getting the satellite data from us, or if you're getting, satellite from another service, the satellites now are very, very good. The nice part about the Jain Logic sensor list is you're getting additional information on top of that. And, we, like you saw on the first slide, we can catch things that we might not be able to see with our naked eye right away. And so you're able to capitalize that and get ahead of it before it becomes an even bigger and more major problem out in the field.
So Connor, after I watch these, I always have additional questions and comments. And so if I have those and I want to get a hold of you, or any of our viewers have those, how can they get a hold of you? And is that okay?
Yeah, of course. So, kind of wrapping up here, my contact information is here on the screen. So if you have any additional questions after this, if you want to take some time, I'm the kind of guy I like to take some time and kind of, mull over things in my mind a little bit and digest. But, as we're wrapping up here, if there's any additional questions from the audience, or, if anybody's had some experience with this and would like to share in on, some successes and some failures, be happy to open it up now and take some time to do that.
Yes. Thank you, Connor. We have one other question here, and that is the Jain Logic sensorless imaging. Do you get those? How often do you get those?
Yeah. So, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and that is that is what it would be for the Jain Logic sensor list, but it would update every single week. So every week you'd be getting updated information, and not just the imagery, but as we saw on the earlier slides, you're actually getting a numerical value coming off of that satellite image that you can work from every single week.
Connor, is once a week enough?
We found that it's been very successful, because we're using it as part of our water management services, and it's proven that it's enough.
Okay, great. Well, Connor, thank you so much. This has been fascinating as always. Love your presentations. I learned a ton today, and I know our viewers did as well, based on the engagement we got. I want to remind everybody that if you want to see all our trainings, well over 100 now, if you go to janesusa.com/trainings, you can find us there. We're also on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And of course, we're on YouTube to watch as well. And if you're enjoying those on YouTube, please do us a favor and click subscribe. That helps us out a lot. So I appreciate that. Again, Connor, thanks so much. Great job today. And thank you, everybody, for spending your lunchtime with us again. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.